This is the January 10th, 2022 meeting of the Indianola Municipal Utilities Board of Trustees. And we'll go ahead and call to order. I already did that, call to order, and now roll call, Chris.
Okay, Board Member Forbush.
Here.
Voights.
Here.
Rosca.
Yes.
Smith. Present. And Richardson.
And on that note, we can announce that former trustee Richardson actually resigned from the board effective last week, or not, I don't remember the exact date. Yeah, January 1st. So she will no longer be on the board, and there's been contact between, I think, several of us on the board, as well as Mayor Erickson, related to appointing a replacement there. Let's move on then to the, public comment. Do we have anybody that wants to make any statements or ask questions? Not at the current time. You guys are here for the Sandhill Energy.
Yeah, we're just curious.
Yeah, okay.
So are we.
Yes. And then, so consent agenda, we have 4 items, November financial statements, claims for both December 29th and January 10th, and then minutes from our last meeting. Let's take those one at a time. So November financials, Chris, do either of you want to give a real brief overview on those, or do you have any comments you want to make?
Just, you can see that this would be for November, so the 5th month into our budget year. You can look at those comparisons, revenues and expenses as compared to budget. Again, on the capital items, you will see some of those expenses are well below what when we compare that to our budget, and that's just due to the fact that there are some projects we haven't started or completed, items that we haven't received, things like automobiles, that sort of thing. So again, I think those look very similar to last month, and that would be the reason why those expenses are showing way below what we've budgeted for this year. So.
And I had asked Chris, so looking at water, the revenue and expenses looked pretty straightforward, kind of offset each other, which is typical. But on electric and fiber, our revenues exceeded expenses by quite a bit during the month of November, which should be a good thing. But I wanted to check and make sure that there wasn't a timing issue of something being recorded in one month when it should have been the other. And Chris, I didn't get a chance to read through the information that you sent, but it sounds like that you did an analysis, and that's just how things fell through this month.
Yes, so Chris and I both looked at that together, both for the electric and the fiber specifically. And again, when you look at those compared to what we budgeted, they're pretty close, very comparable to where we were at this time last year with that budget. So we did take a look at that, and if you have any further questions based on our email, please let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
So bottom line, it was actually sales that it was.
And expenses were under. Yeah. Yeah. What's that?
The capital project payments, we need to pay for those.
Right.
Will come, and they just have not registered.
And I was mainly focusing on operating funds, not the capital fund, but yes. Okay, anything else with financials? And then any questions or comments on the claims? And we'll take both of those together. I think I asked questions from the December 29th claims, but I think I got responses on those, and I didn't have any questions on the January 10th ones. And then minutes. Hearing nothing, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
So.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? The consent agenda items are all approved. We will then move on to electric utility information items. And this is a follow-up topic from our discussions at our last meeting, but it's a solar update and discussion of Sandhill Energy. And I'll turn it over to Chris to make introductions before we speak with Sandhill.
All right. Yeah. So, out of our last meeting, I think you guys had some questions. Spoke with Rocky here at the Sandhill Energy about some of those questions, and I thought it'd be probably best rather than play intermediary. We can go through some of those questions. I think he's got a little bit of a presentation, or at least he can go through the concept and discuss a little more specific than I was able to at the last meeting. And from that, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask him. This is really intended to be an interactive information finding, and we met with Mike Lou and I met with Rocky last week and got a lot of good information. So we'll make sure you guys cover that at least. And so with that, I'll kind of turn it over. Rocky, you want to introduce yourself and your position?
Sure. So thanks for the introduction, Chris. So I don't have a presentation today, unfortunately. I did send kind of the presentation we gave in Kearney ahead of time just to kind of share with the group, but I can give a quick overview of the project from our perspective. So my name is Rocky Yanakouros. It's going to be much easier to call me Rocky than to try to pronounce my last name. So I have a big fat Greek last name, but I'm Senior VP of Operations at Sandhills Energy. I'm also the co-founder of Blue Sky Solar, which I understand probably caused a little bit of confusion. So let me explain that. I think it's probably going to be a good thing that Blue Sky Solar and Sandhills are teaming up in the way we are to tackle this project. So I'll talk a little bit about our background. So Sandhills Energy has been a very successful developer of utility scale solar and with large wind projects. I think they built a relationship with Mean specifically in wind developments in the past. But also have done large, pretty large successful solar developments. Blue Sky Solar, which I founded back in 2012, so we're about 10 years old now, is started out as like more of a, like we've always been a solar developer. We're local to Iowa, so I'm based out of our Dubuque office where I was born and raised. About half our whole office in Dubuque is, Dubuque, like focused in Iowa. We've done over 450 projects, what I would call distributed generation projects. So not at that larger utility scale. We have about 450 now. I think that information you had said 400, but grown a little bit since then even. And that's our primary market is in Iowa, but we do work in Illinois and Wisconsin and a little bit in Nebraska as well. So we are teaming up with Sandhills Energy on the Mean portfolio. My understanding, and I don't know how much of you know this history, but there was an attempt at this project a couple of years ago. The prices weren't quite where they needed to be. We actually at that point had bid it independently of Sandhills, but have had a good working relationship with them as a group. And the idea is teaming up on it now and going forward is to bring the relationships that Sandhills Energy created in the utility scale space and the expertise that excuse me? Oh, sorry, I thought someone had a question. So to kind of bring the expertise that we have in the distributed generation space and asset ownership space. So Blue Sky Solar owns and operates assets across Iowa. So most notably and similar to yours would be like a 4 megawatt project in West Burlington, Iowa. We own a portfolio of projects in Mason City, which is pretty close to you as well. We own other, what we like power purchase agreement type of setups across Iowa and some in Illinois as well. And so the idea of like the Mean, RFP was to try to bring utility scale pricing to these distributed projects that are all kind of, I think you guys are on the larger side of the projects at 4 megawatt DC nameplate. So to try to bring that pricing to the portfolio by scale. So really we're giving you like 35 megawatt pricing and we're able to offer that to each community by combining all the projects into one closing. So reducing closing costs to help bring the price down. It's also obviously like a bulk purchase of PV modules, of racking, inverters, like all the big major components of solar. So the idea was to try to attempt to do that. I think we did that successfully. And so I'm kind of eager to discuss, and answer any questions you might have about that.
So tell us about this Burlington project. when did this start? How long have you been actively involved in that? And
Sure. So it had a long development cycle. It's not common to see megawatt scale solar in Iowa. There's only kind of a handful of, what I would call like inside the meter large projects like that. So I think probably to date, that's probably still the biggest inside the meter installation in Iowa that's privately owned. And so that I think we started working on that project like in 2018. When we wrapped it up in kind of late 2019. So it had a kind of a little bit longer development cycle. And some of that was, there was a series of studies with the utility. I think at the time it was the first level 4 application that was actually completed with Alliant Energy. And because it's on Alliant Energy's grid. And we negotiated kind of like a compromise with the utility in which, instead of going like to a straight level 4 application where there would have been some pretty costly utility upgrades there, or to a level 3 where it's zero export and would have really limited the size of the solar asset itself. We negotiated the first, like what Alliant Energy calls like 3.5, level 3.5 application. So it was an export limit. So we used a pretty sophisticated set of direct trip transfer relays and, basically programming and settings that we worked through with the utility to accomplish that. The array's been in production for a little, about a year and a half now. It's exceeded the production estimate. Great River Medical Center is particularly happy with it, and we're now currently submitting our application to do a second project with them. So they've been a great partner to work with, and really understanding of kind of being on the vanguard of a large solar project like that inside the meter. They were incredibly patient and super helpful to get that project across the finish line.
And is that project similar to this in that you own the assets, lease land from the city or the utility? How does that all work?
We do, yeah. Actually, we lease the land from the hospital, who's actually the off taker. So the off taker is the purchaser of the energy, right? In your case, you guys would be the off taker, we'd be the seller. So yeah, in that case, we are the managing partner of the project co that holds the solar asset. And yeah, so does that answer your question? There is a land lease with the city with the hospital who own the extra land. And in that case, the land is, I want to say it's approximately half a mile from the interconnection point at the hospital. So we had a pretty big step up. So we had some pretty big gear there and a step up transformer in order to tie in a primary voltage a half mile away. So all in all, like for its time, like a pretty impressive project in Iowa. I mean, those happen other places in the country. The Midwest is just kind of catching up now.
So Rocky, now that you're on this side of the project, and when you're starting to think about planning for a project like this, are there things that we would take into consideration differently than you approach the situation in Burlington?
Well, so one of, in this instance, what's unique, I think, about this and probably more in your favor is that you are the utility that's requesting it. So you have a better handle on what your infrastructure is. It's, we don't have to go through kind of like a standard study process, because I assume, Mike kind of has a lot of that information about backflow and what substation this is planned for, how backflow works there. Things like that. So it's a little less complicated in that the interconnection point and step up transformer is going to be, kind of selected by you and much closer to the array. It's also simpler that you're in front of the planning process for this, right? So we're not kind of coming to you with this out of the blue, like, hey, here's a customer in your territory that wants this. You are the customer, so you're expecting it. I think here's a couple of the things that I like better that we're doing with the Mean portfolio that weren't available to us at the time when we did the West Burlington project. So one of them is that we're using a tracker, which, the economics on a tracker pencil out much better. And the ATI tracker in particular is a really high quality tracker that we wouldn't have had access to at that scale. So when we're just talking about a 4 megawatt project, ATI is not going to entertain that, right? So because we have 35 megawatts, we're bringing them to them, and because Sandhills has a larger relationship and has a proven track record of larger developments, that's really helping us access that kind of better technology and tracking, which is going to bring a better value to you at the end of the day. We're also using First Solar, which is an American-made module. At the West Burlington project, we use GCL, which is a tier 1 monocrystalline module. It's really high quality module, but it wasn't American made. I'm much happier that we now have a direct purchasing relationship with First Solar. Just in terms of quality, it's got an industry leading low degradation factor. So the other modules are pretty standard across the board, like a 0.5% degradation annually. This is only 0.33% degradation. It's a glass on glass module, so it's really robust. And I don't know how much this matters to you, but it's like a solid black module. It's a really sleek look. It's much more shade and soiling tolerant than the traditional like monocrystalline modules that you'll see used across Iowa. So it's just kind of, again, First Solar is generally only going to sell to these larger, like multi-million dollar, I should say like, $100, $200 million, that's kind of their market. And so what we're able to do with a 35 megawatt portfolio is we're able to bring that technology to you now and make it, accessible to a distributed project. So those are some of the things that I like a lot better about this project. But I'm also very happy with the way the West Burlington project did go.
Great, thank you.
What's an ATI tracker and why do I care?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, here's why you do care is that trackers are moving parts. And so their design is just quite a bit better. It's, less moving parts. There's no scheduled maintenance of the tracker. So you're not having to go out there and check bearings, and this would be on us. But at the end of the day, like you're receiving, you're buying power off of this, you want it to work. So their tracker's less moving parts. It's just a much more efficient design. There's no pre-scheduled maintenance. So we're not out there checking bearings and, gaskets and motors and gearboxes and things like that. So it's, it's not to go like in the weeds on the technical side, but it matters quite a bit when you have a tracker to have, a lower maintenance tracker means more uptime.
So a tracker is a thing that tilts the panels.
Correct. I apologize. Yes, it's the racking that the modules are mounted on. Yes. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, please stop me if I use any jargon like that or anything. So yeah.
And then, so I understand. So less moving parts, less maintenance. That makes sense. From a maintenance standpoint, so you're going to take care of all these things. You're going to do any cleaning, any snow brushing off, how do those things work?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we own and operate them. So if like the I would say like the incentive for it to perform matters to us the most, right? Because it's the asset that we own. And we use high quality product for that reason. So for example, the inverter, which is what takes the direct current from the solar panels and converts it to alternating current, that's an American made product. It's a premium product. It's the Selectria XGI series. And all of those components are very intentionally picked to be premium products because we're taking a long-term stake in the ownership and operation of the asset. So from an O&M standpoint, what's nice is because it's a basically a third-party finance project, between our credit investors and our lender, there's very standard pre-scheduled protocols for O&M. So there's a laid out schedule and an O&M contract built into the project already. So basically like maintenance becomes a breeze. Like we have like personal staff that monitors not only just our assets that we own, but all the solar projects that we have out there in the distributed, generation universe between the 3-state or 4-state market that we operate in. And so they monitor our assets as well. And we have teams ready to go and do maintenance. We have all these components on hand to keep downtime to a minimum. In terms of removing snow, though, it's a good question. I heard that came up in your last meeting. So again, I'll talk about the wonders of this tracker. It has a sensor actually that when it snows, it'll tilt the modules. If you guys can see my hand, it'll take them from flat like this. It'll tilt them at an angle to kind of have that snow collect less on it. And just the movement throughout the day of the tracker from east to west is going to shed snow too. We generally don't do snow removal. It's built into the model. So we build in a higher soiling factor in our model for the winter months, especially like we know the Iowa market really well because it's our core market. And so we just build in a soiling factor, and those losses are your losses. The good news is that the modules are all black. So if there's some exposure, they tend to generate enough heat, because unfortunately solar panels are a little bit inefficient. They generate enough heat to generally make the snow fall off. If you have these like -2 degree days like we've been having, you're going to have some snow that's going to stick on there for a little while, but those losses are built in through a model.
So you talked about this a little bit already, but I want you to expand on it. So the rate that we as IMU would pay for the purchase power agreement is slightly higher than what we buy the rest of our electricity from through Mean, but it's less than when Mean did the RFP process. Your rate was a fair amount less than the other competitors. How are you able to get that rate lower, closer to the rate that we're buying our power from Mean through?
Yeah, so a couple ways. Like us taking the ownership and operation position in the asset is one way, right? So there's not like a third party that's taking a portion of the return. We're not selling the project off to someone at a return. I think the biggest factor really simply is bringing Sandhills relationships and leveraging those to have a direct purchasing, relationship with First Solar, for example, with ATI, with XGI. Like we're getting better pricing on that product because of the volume that they do with those companies, and being able to buy direct instead of through distribution, or even just not being a large customer to them. And when you're coupling that with our experience in project management, asset ownership, I think that's kind of the perfect marriage there. We also bid, we both bid this project the first round, so we were pretty familiar with it. And Eric, our president at Sandhills, has direct relationships with a lot of the communities, a lot of the larger anchor communities. So he was pretty aware of who was going to hop on when it went through. And so we did bid it expecting the portfolio to expand. It did. And so that helps us quite a bit, because we took a pretty aggressive stance on our price, assuming that volume would come on board if we did. And again, a lot of that's the reputation and relationships that Eric has built in those communities across Nebraska.
And that's what happened to us. We weren't in on the original arrangement, but when the price came back, we became more interested.
You were not on our radar, and I'm really disappointed about that, because I wanted more Iowa projects. I was really excited about Waverly. Like we knew Waverly was going to get in. We knew that they were one of the drivers. We knew about Sergeant Bluff. It looks like Denver, Iowa is entertaining some interest, but may not probably get on board in time. But I'm an Iowa boy, so I really want more solar in Iowa. It's kind of a little bit of an ego boost for me because it's local. They're more local projects in my state. So you guys weren't on my radar for it, and really excited that you guys gave us a call and were interested to participate.
Leslie, we haven't heard any questions from you. Do you have anything to add?
Leslie, I think you're on mute.
Am I on mute now?
Nope, I can hear you.
Okay. My concern, I think, was trying to figure out how you would be able to give us such a low figure when most places cannot. And my concern that how long will that last?
I'm not sure I understand the question entirely in terms of how long it'll last. Maybe it would help if I explain how some of these are structured on the back end.
Okay.
So yeah, so what we have to do, and I left out an important part of how we got to the low price too. We're using a unique financing. So typically, and this is getting like a little technical on the financial side, but that's kind of my forte. So typically these projects are financed on a 25-year amortization with like a traditional lender, like a bank or something like that, with a 5-year balloon, and interest rates in those like generally are around 4.5%, right? And with a 5-year balloon where you'd have to refinance at 5 years. We're using a unique financing that fits this portfolio really well. It's the USDA's RUS program. It's designed for rural utilities that service communities less than 20,000. And the interest rates are considerably better, and it's a 25-year fixed rate. So I left that out. That's a major component of how we get to our price. The reason why that's usually not utilized is because to go through that application process, say like on your project alone, probably is like a lot, right? But to do it for the 35 communities bundled as one, it makes a lot of sense, right? So that's one reason. But to kind of explain how these projects are structured is like these are built around a pro forma that's given to the lender and to the credit investors. It's vetted. So once that's approved, it really depends on the system performing, which is warranted. It's covered under warranty and insured. All the major components have long-term warranties. We have decades of solar data to indicate, what are reasonable models. Like there's an appraisal done on the project to verify like, production estimates and downtime and O&M and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, really once the project is closed, it's not going to, the pricing isn't going to change. Does that make sense? It's a 25-year contracted rate. So once that's done, like that's your rate.
So the warranties and stuff follow that 25-year amortization as well?
Yeah, well, your PV modules have like a much longer useful life than 25 years, but yeah, the 25 years is kind of that's what the PPA is written for in this instance, which is pretty standard across the industry. I mean, you don't typically see them much shorter than that, and longer than that, there's extension opportunities and things, but 25 years is pretty standard.
And then my next question would be, how much are you counting on rebates and tax incentives, that kind of stuff from the state of Iowa?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Well, not with the state of Iowa, right? So the state of Iowa had they had a solar tax credit, right? But it capped at $5,000 for residential and $20,000 for commercial. That's gone, right? I think commercial projects still could have captured it in the last year, but it's expired. The funds are overused. The $20,000 doesn't move the needle on your project. So we weren't planning on any tax incentives that way in Iowa. I think there'll be an allocation of the bonus depreciation or accelerated depreciation in Iowa. So Iowa uses a 5-year maker schedule for the asset depreciation. So that'll be a tax benefit we're counting on. There's federal depreciation. There's a federal tax credit at 26% currently.
So is there concern that tax credit will go away before this is done?
That's a really good question. So the tax credit was extended through 2022 at the 26% level. There's a step down after that if no action's taken, but there's a safe harbor procedure. So meaning that we're going to use the 5% rule for our safe harbor, which we're hoping not to have to use. We think the federal government's going to extend it anyway, but the 5% rule is that 5% of the cost of each project has to be incurred by the end of 2022. So that's a pretty easy threshold to meet, just with the timeliness of the POs that we have to place anyway on the project. It's pretty easy to incur 5% of the cost.
Is West Burlington, so that's the largest project you guys have done to date?
That's the largest one we own. Yeah, for sure. Sand Hills has done some larger projects, but they don't own and operate those.
Okay. Other than West Burlington, what other projects in the area might, we be aware of?
Yeah, Mason City, I think, is pretty close to you guys. So that's one that you probably would be aware of. And that's a portfolio of projects. So a couple of, I think all in, it's right around that 4 megawatt mark as well. So some of the others would be like in Illinois. We have some smaller power purchase agreements that I don't think necessarily relate to your project really specifically in that way, but most of the rest would be like in Illinois, because Illinois has been a really strong market due to their SREC incentive.
So if we were to call Mason City or West Burlington and say, hey, tell us about these folks, how did this project go? What would they tell us? So
the West Burlington folks would tell you it's great and they're doing another project at their Fort Madison location, right? If you talk to Mason City, they'll tell you the project was extremely complicated and they would endorse us heavily because they had a lot of issues with site control on the land themselves, and we were very accommodating. They actually got hit with a large infrastructure upgrade from the utility that we absorbed and still met their PPA rate. So I think if you talk to Aaron Burnett, the city manager up there, or Mark, I'm drawing a blank on Mark, the engineer's name, the city engineer up there, but two great guys that are asking us to also bid their school district coming up.
What would you do differently on those projects?
What would I do differently? Well, hindsight's 2020, right? And so I would say that we would have allowed more lead time on the level 4 application process with Alliant in West Burlington. I think we went very much by the Chapter 45 rules on how long that would take, and I guess we didn't really understand that every time you get one of those studies, there's quite a bit of time in between to digest that and back and forth with the utility. So I think it added months to that project that if we had set that expectation and it, and ourselves had planned on it, I think that would have been easier. In Mason City, most of it would have to do with, establishing title control in Iowa is like a lengthy process. And so I think in a lot of those instances, we assumed the municipality did have site control or had title commitment to some of these properties. And so I think that was probably a lesson we learned, is that, don't get too cart before the horse on that. Like, we'd establish title control first. But yeah.
Yeah, and my question, or at least kind of go over, Rocky, you looked at the site. What are your thoughts, pros, cons? What are your concerns about the site specifically? What do you like about it?
So yeah, I like the site. It was really cold that day that I looked at it, but I like the site a lot. You have a slight slope to the south, which is kind of ideal, in my opinion. It's well within the tolerance of the ATI tracking system, the racking system. And a little slope to the south is always to our advantage. There's really a great, solar window there, like sun window. I like the fact that the facility needs a fence already. I always like when we can kind of make our interests work together. So, it sounds like there's some, interest in more security at the site, and we have to put a fence around anyway. So it's kind of win-win, I think. The challenges of that site, they aren't big challenges. I mean, we've crossed water lines and sewer lines before, but we'll have to be careful as we do that with power lines, and we'll just have to do a really good job of and Mason City is a good example of this, because we did their wastewater treatment plant, and we had to cross through their wastewater treatment plant. And one of the nice things is, we registered our medium voltage line on 811. So now anytime that they call, it gets treated like a public utility, even though it's a private utility technically. So it shows up on that registry anytime they need to locate or do any digging around there. I think we'd do a similar thing at your site, but we'd hydrovac to make sure, and we'd cross at points where you wanted. So that's really where the careful due diligence would come in, is just making sure that we are putting our equipment in a place where you don't need to interfere with it for your operations, and we're definitely not interfering with your future operations. but I like the dual use of the site too. I mean, that's always like, in my mind, the one disadvantage to solar, right, is that it takes up a lot of space, or relative amount of space. And so when you're taking like, really productive land out of use, that's always a little disappointing to me. And I like that, I understand that you were leasing this land out for like hay and soybeans, right? But it seems like this is probably a better use for it. And so we're kind of getting a dual purpose out of the land there, that it's your facility and we're using like kind of the extra space around it.
So you want to talk a little bit about, so we, again, it's farm field right now, where you would go with it, the maintenance that's going to be expected of us in that undersoiling or the prairie land, what your expectations out of the utility are versus, what you're going to take up in that maintenance and what will be required.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, we have a strong environmental ethic, and what I think is just a general best practice in the industry, and everything's kind of tending this way, is to try to create pollinator habitat around solar to get, like again, around that concept of getting more use out of the land. So we're going to use a specific pollinator mix there to kind of enhance pollinator habitat. It's also, beneficially like a low maintenance mix that doesn't grow very high. So it only needs to be mowed, maybe once or twice a year. That's all built into our O&M contract. So we'll manage that. My understanding is there might be some concerns about thistles in the area. Is that Chris or Mike? Is that?
We check on it. Every year we do a thistle management just because we want to be neighborly. And then when you're farming, nobody likes thistles when you're farming. So
sure. So I've made a special note of that and already passed it on to our team. So, and if you guys decide to move forward with your project, we'll talk more about us taking all of that thistle management for you. But obviously you'll have access to the site too. So if you ever wanted to just inspect for thistles or let us know, hey, we feel like there's a few thistles popping up out here, can you get someone out here to maintain it? That's not a problem. But for the most part, the idea behind the pollinator habitat is that it's going to look like a very intentional habitat that doesn't require a lot of maintenance. The idea would be to not disturb that habitat once it's established, or disturb it as little as possible to maintain it so that it's not interfering with the solar operations and that it looks nice.
So what site preparation work would we have to do prior to you guys doing your thing?
So the site prep's really on us. That's part of our turnkey offering. So what we'll be doing is we'll be doing an environmental analysis, a geotech analysis, and then if any site prep like we might move some dirt at the site, which it's likely we will. If we decide, I talked a little bit with Chris and Mike about and Lou about maybe removing some trees and utilizing an area right now that's kind of wooded with trees that probably have to go anyway because they're ash. So that kind of stuff falls all under our scope of work. That wouldn't be something you need to do. If it was work that you want. So I should say this, because I know you have an emphasis on using local, and I agree with that. I like that. And I think the good news is, of the companies that bid this RFP, we were the only Iowa-based company that I know of that did. So you got the localist company that submitted a response to the RFP, but also like we try to use local labor as much as possible. So for example, we need to put a fence around there. We're going to try to use a local company to do that because we like using local labor as much as possible. We need a fence, but we're not a fencing company. And so, we take your thoughts on who the local options would be on that. We take that into consideration. If the city itself had equipment and wanted to do the tree removal, which I think we talked about, and maybe that isn't a good fit, but we could hire you to do that work. But to be clear, we're not expecting you to do that work. We're expecting that falls under our scope of work.
So from an infrastructure standpoint, all we do is point and say, go get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's more or less correct. Yeah. We do need you to provide us the point of interconnection, and we're willing to help with that. So you need to source a transformer and have a kind of a maintenance plan for that transformer, whether it's a backup transformer or some type of other maintenance plan. So that's what we need from you. Obviously the PPA is going to be something your legal counsel is going to have to review, and we're not expecting a big back and forth on that because means putting eyes on it, but it's a big legal document, and that's going to probably be the biggest hurdle that we have to get through together.
PPA's purchase power.
Sorry, yes, power purchase agreement. Yep, sorry about that.
Good question. You guys have any questions?
I think he's pretty well answered all the questions I had. Maintenance was my concern, and he very well handled that.
So your maintenance would come out of Dubuque then?
Did you say our maintenance would be out of Dubuque?
Yeah.
It's going to be out of Iowa. It's not, so we have partners across Iowa. So for example, West Burlington's like 3 hours from us, similar to you. I think you're like 3 hours from us too. We use a local contractor down there with we have an on-staff master electrician and technicians. And so it depends on how big the job is. If it's something that warrants us making a 3-hour drive, our team will work in conjunction with them. But if it's little things like, what I'll tell you is the majority of maintenance that we do is related to the comms, the communications, and communications are important. I'm not diminishing that, but it doesn't affect the production of the array. So what you'll often have is RS-485s, Modbus protocols, things like that glitching up. And so we'll probably have someone more local that can make just a quick 1-hour trip to the site, resolve that issue and be out of there. So we have those partnerships across Iowa. Like most notably, I want to say right now, the closest partnership to you is going to be in Hubbard, Iowa. We have like an electrical group that we do like solar install work for. And then also they do O&M work for us as well in your area. But we might build someone even more local, given the proximity between Waverly and you.
So you won't have a staff on site.
We do, yeah. Actually, we will, yeah. Well, we'll have. So we have our own project managers, and we'll be very hands on through the building. And like I said, with the O&M, I have staff in Dubuque. Like I have technicians in Dubuque. We may send them if it's something a little more technical. Like most of the spare parts that we're going to have for like the XGI inverters, that's going to be warehoused in Dubuque or Omaha. And I think Omaha's technically closer to you guys, but it would probably come out of our Dubuque office for Iowa, because our licensed electrician would probably run down to do something technical like that.
So where would your home be? Where would the personnel stay or work from?
Oh, that's what I'm trying to say is for like minor repairs, like we maintain a relationship with multiple electrical contractors across the state. So we do, to be clear, like this group in Hubbard, like when they sell a solar project, like they call us up and we design and build the solar side of it. They do the electrical work. And so it's a working relationship. We do maybe 30 projects with them a year. And so
you're not actually on site, but you can monitor it.
Well, we do all the monitoring of the solar assets ourselves in-house here out of the Dubuque office. That's where we monitor all the solar that we have. Where we release a technician from is going to be a function of what needs to be done. So for example, let's say you had like a transformer issue or like a major inverter replacement. Like that's a job that requires a licensed electrician. We could pull the team from Hubbard in, but we would send our one of our licensed electricians out to that site in that instance, because it's a full day of work. If it's like a comms issue where we have like an Ethernet cable that's bad between one of the inverters and one's not communicating, that's like a half hour to an hour fix. We'd probably use someone more local. We'd use one of our partnerships that's local for that. So the O&M is kind of a function of a network of preferred partners that we have that we work closely with. We're not just calling a random electrician. Let's put it that way.
Rocky, you wouldn't have somebody on site day in and day out. It would just be as needed for O&M type of work, right?
Correct. Yeah. So pre-scheduled O&M is going to be our technicians going to do that, because There's visual inspections that happen several times a year. There's, like we'd run a Megger test on lines. We'd run like thermal cameras, like all that stuff's built in our own. If it's a pre-scheduled maintenance visit, we're going to do that in-house. If it's some other type of communication, we want to get that up as quick as possible. And so we have a network built for that.
What about your partners and access to materials and things like that you need? You hear all the stories today about extremely long lead times and supply chain issues and everything else. Mm-hmm. Say from the time we start moving dirt, how far down the road until we're got some power?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So that's gonna mostly be dictated by how long it takes to get all the power purchase agreements signed. From there, like we have kind of a detailed schedule built out in the presentation that I sent ahead of this, and I can send that out to you individually. But basically, like if you're talking about lead time on parts, that's why we stock parts. So XGI is our house brand, so we carry extra components for that specifically. So there's really no issue with an XGI inverter other than a complete failure of the inverter that we wouldn't have parts to replace, or do maintenance on. One thing I will point out too is our design's pretty intentional that way. So we're using multiple inverters to come up to we're using 166 kilowatt inverters to come to your 3.5 megawatt AC nameplate. And the reason is that way, if you did have a full inverter failure, it's not taking your whole system down like a central inverter would. It's a more granular design to provide more uptime.
I'm not talking really from a maintenance perspective. I'm just talking about getting the project moving off the ground.
Yeah, getting the project moving off the ground. Our big lead time items right now are PV modules. So I think right now we have a delivery date with First Solar in September. We're hoping they can hold that. All indications are they will. The other aspects that have longer lead times are like designing for the racking. So we have 10 weeks of geotech before we can get our drawings done for the specific construction set done, and there's another 6 weeks to get that construction set done. We won't do full geotech until these power purchase agreements are starting to get signed. We're doing some preliminary environmental right now, like desktop environmental and things like that at our own risk at communities that have expressed to move forward. So we might be talking to you about that if we feel that you're saying, yeah, we'd like to continue to pursue this and move through the power purchase agreement negotiation. We may ask you, hey, can we mobilize some desktop environmental things like that? But that would be all at our risk, understanding that you might decide, yeah, we just can't live with this power purchase agreement, so we're not going to move forward. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. Really, I think what's our window of opportunity to move forward on this?
Yeah, as soon as possible. How's that for an answer? I know I sound like a politician. Our hope had been to have power purchase agreements executed by like early January. Obviously, we're nowhere near that goal right now. You don't have it in front of you yet, but I know that I believe Mean turned around their comments on the power purchase agreement. Their legal counsel reviewed it, and I believe they turned their comments around. I haven't seen them yet, but they came to us this afternoon. So my expectation is that those are not going to be very difficult comments for us to accept, and that we'll be able to turn those around quickly and then get the document out to the communities to start reviewing with your legal counsel. I would give you guys at least 2 weeks. Well, let's say at least a week, because I want to be aggressive, but I think 2 weeks is reasonable to review that, and that hopefully, you'd find everything acceptable in there with your legal counsel. But I understand there's still an approval process after your legal counsel approves it. So, I mean, as long as we're making progress, we're comfortable continuing to do some of the pre-development at our own risk. So I know that's not as good of an answer as you wanted. Our goal is to start construction in May. And so like May through November is the window that we want to be doing construction. I think that's an aggressive goal.
Okay.
So Chris, is really our decision point as a board whether to sign the power purchase agreement or not?
Yeah, well, we'll have to sign Rocky, you want to talk about the agreements? There's a lease agreement that we have to be okay with the ground lease, and then the purchase power agreement. Rocky, you want to talk about the agreements that we're gonna see coming to us and that we will be discussing as a group?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I think the general terms will be settled on, right? So you know your power rate, you know the term, you know the escalator. So there'll be a lot of things in there about, yeah, like we're expecting you to provide the land with a $0 lease on it. It's all the other like kind of legal protections. I think some of the things we talked about, specifically with Mike, we talked about, what does downtime look like? So you're providing a transformer, for example, that could go down, which causes downtime to us. There's going to be protections in there for us against significant downtime there. I mean, that's a part of the agreement. If I was you, I'd want to read carefully. I mean, we're obviously accommodating on that because it's a whole portfolio. It's not just your project, but there's, I think those are the terms that, you're going to get into kind of like the legal back and forth, like what does early termination look like, things like that. So it's an extensive document. It's one that your legal counsel is probably going to be pretty familiar with, though. Like they're pretty standard documents as far as like renewable energy projects, other tax equity flip models, like housing models, things like that.
Well, not being able to make a 2-week window or start this by May. Are there any other times that we could hop on the portfolio? Because I don't see it happening that quickly.
Yeah, why not, Leslie?
I think we have a lot of things that we need to discuss, and we haven't finished our strategic plans yet. There's quite a few things that I just don't see that we could meet a 2-week deadline.
Yeah, well, that's certainly not a hard deadline, Leslie. Like our goal is to try to get as many communities on board as possible. There is definitely going to be a point where we have to say we have to close this out to move forward, right? Right. So we are going to stretch that as far as we can, and we're going to work with you to help do anything we can do to expedite it. I don't have a hard deadline for you because we haven't determined that yet, but yeah, there's going to be a point where we have to say, okay, this is the group we have, and to the others, hopefully we can do a second round or something like that. But as of right now, there's really no guarantees of a second round like that or anything like that.
Okay. Rocky, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're talking about that 2-week deadline, you're talking about 2 weeks from the date that we would get your agreement, not necessarily 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, and I don't like calling it a deadline. I'd call it a goal, right? It's a 2-week goal, but yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, that it would be, we'd provide you the document, and I would hope that your legal counsel could turn comments around that quickly. We don't think, I mean, it's designed to not have 35 different agreements, right? Or 25 different agreements. It's designed to have kind of a standard document with maybe minor tweaks depending on local communities and state laws and things like that, because we're spanning a pretty big geographic area. Like small communities are probably going to have different comments than larger communities, as an example.
So how many do you have in your portfolio right now for this project?
Well, we don't have any signed PPAs, right? We currently have 25 communities interested in moving forward, that we have a verbal commitment. And so, for example, I think Waverly tomorrow they have a meeting where they're going to approve, they're going to authorize them to move forward with land acquisition and negotiation of the power purchase agreement. Everybody's at a little bit different stage, but most communities have defined a date when they'll give a green light to start the negotiation process.
And what happens if you don't get all of those?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What happens if you don't get all of those communities? How many communities did you need?
Well, we have way more than we need, so that's not the issue at this point. Yeah, I mean, it would have to be more than half of the communities would have to drop off before we'd even really, feel that, I think.
Okay.
Chris, we also talked about maybe doing something like a little array someplace else. Are there many other discussions about that, or Have we kind of poo-pooed that?
I think the cost of the transformers is really leading that. More sites and more locations increases the metering stuff, and that's our largest investment.
Yeah.
We considered it, and there's some options, but because of the large cash outlay for multiple sites, we really kind of, as a group, I think, coalesced on the water plant. As Rocky was talking about some of the purchase power, the service and uptime risks. One of the items as we're seeing that Mike and I were discussing is, are we best to have one large transformer and purchase a backup so we can make that, or if we're downsizing it and go 3 or 4, where if one transformer went down, we still have 3 going. That's I think where we're looking at some of the finances, what's going to be the best value for us, meeting those SLA requirements and meeting those uptime requirements for them. Certainly there's a cost benefit of having 3 or 4 or 5 transformers to accomplish the goal that one could, but one could fail entirely, and then you go from not 100% to 80%, you go from 100% to 0. So that's there's certain cost and analysis that we need to do once we see what that contract looks like, and what'll be the best choice for us.
Have we let the tenants know that the land won't be available?
Yes. Yes.
And Mike, you were hesitant to give us a price tag for the upfront cost. Do you have a better sense for that? No.
We may have been on the low end. The transformer it uses it's a different voltage, secondary voltage than standard built. So I can't just go grab one of our standard transformers on the secondary voltage side. So it's definitely different. I need to get he gave us some pricing from one that they're built brand new across seas to be brought back over, was definitely more than where I thought we were at. And that was for one large transformer.
Is there any working with it? There's the other communities are on the same boat, aren't they?
Yep.
So is there some way where we can piggyback on some purchasing with?
Yep. So that's we talked through that with Rocky the other day as well, that you can find somebody that's got the same primary voltage and then secondary and try to coordinate that together. You still run the risk. The downside of that, if you don't have one sitting here, you run the risk always. How much risk do you want to take? But do they? Sometimes does that community all of a sudden they lost their transformer, and that's when we need 2 days later or even a month later or 6 months later, our spare gets used, we're out at that point in time. So which goes back to Chris's point that we probably need to look in the contract and see what our requirements are to be down, what that would
cost us.
All right.
And we're going to have to run this power how far?
Not very far. We've got it right there on K Street.
So
it depends on where we put when we get into more design working with Rocky, wherever that transformer.
Because he was talking a half mile in the West Burlington
Yep.
scenario, and I thought ours was at least that far.
No, we should be right there close. I'm not for sure, like I said, where he's planning on that
Okay.
To be, but it won't be very. Yeah.
That's what the water.
Well, that's right out there on the main. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down K Street and then
Gotcha.
17th. We got
Gotcha.
kind of that.
We've actually got 2 options. We go on K Street or to the south, which is West 17th. We tie in at either places. We're only going to tie in at one spot. It just depends on where it makes the most sense.
So this is just as much a question for Roy, but I'll also ask Chris too. What are our next steps with this? I know we need to get some of these agreements that Rocky talked about and get those in front of attorneys, but in terms of a decision point for us as a board, what additional information, what additional due diligence, what else do we need to be thinking about?
I think the contracts are the big driver. Certainly we had, some questions, a lot of the what ifs, we're expecting to see those in the contracts. From the other perspective, I was meeting with some of the other electrical providers, and each have their own kind of sales pitch. I think what I like about the Sandhills is their intent to hold that versus really seeing a lot of the developer relationships. And so because they are going to be a long-term power provider and own that, I think they're going to be a better long-term partner. They're planning on being here for 25 years too, rather than get it up, get it going, get the most amount of it, sell and hit the road. So,
Rocky, you're still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Rocky, is there anything in your contract that prohibits you from selling these assets?
So there's nothing that prohibits us from selling it. But what I will tell you is we'd be foolish to sell it, but due to the way it's financed through the RUS, it's like 2.7% interest money. So that's an asset we definitely want to hold on to. But ultimately, if you look at our business model, it's to own solar assets. It's not just to build them. You know, that's where we started. We started building them. Our business model is very focused around owning and operating solar assets.
And if the rate is fixed and the escalator.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah. No, I get that part of it. So let me ask a question. Let's assume a worst case scenario. All of a sudden, things don't go well, and unfortunately, your business fails. You guys go under. We're sitting here with a whole bunch of pretty black squares. What recourse do we have? How do we do things? How do we get rid of stuff? How might something like that work?
Yeah, so I hate talking about scenarios where I go out of business, but let's entertain it because it's a fair question, right? It's a fair question. So what I would say is the pretty black squares are worth a lot of money with, assuming they weren't operating or something. Once that array is all built, it takes a pretty low skill level to keep it working. And so you have manufacturer warranties that back it. You'd have a lot of interested parties. The main point though is that the project entity itself, that your contract is with the project entity, and it's not with like Blue Sky Solar or Sandhills. So that whoever takes over that project entity owns and operates it and has an interest in it operating because it's a financial asset. So it'd be similar to like buying a building, if you want to think of it that way, like someone takes over ownership of that asset then, right? The good news is we won't go out of business, right?
Well, in that scenario, first of all, you're also assuming that the equipment remains operational and everything else. And it's a scenario where we have pieces of equipment on our property that we don't even own. And so I guess I see that as potentially down the road if something were to go. And I appreciate your comments about not wanting to go out of business, but just thinking about some bad scenarios.
Rocky, is this something that you guys would entertain, that we'd have a first right of refusal? Like, should you go into liquidation, that we can have a first right of refusal on these assets on our property? Maybe that's getting a little more lawyer, a little more technical. But is that what are your thoughts on us being the first ones to say, no, we can't afford to buy those should the worst happen?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I always have to check that by our legal teams to make sure that we're not putting some language in there that makes the agreement not viable. But I believe that question has come up before. And I think it came up with Waverly specifically. So yeah, what I would say is when you have the document, add those red lines in, and we're gonna accommodate everything we can. I think that's definitely on the table. Some communities have asked for an early buyout option. We don't want that. We want to own the asset. So it's just more to the point of, like, some people want like a 10 or 15 year purchase option, and we're not in favor of that, right, per se. But those are items, if you feel strongly about that kind of thing, like we can have that conversation. I can tell you there's parameters around that, right? The IRS is going to put restrictions on it. Like, it has to be a fair market value assessed purchase. We can't sell it to you at a discount, for example, or things like that.
Rocky, refresh my memory. Is there a cap on the escalator?
Are you okay?
It's a 0.5% annually through the 25-year period.
Else is saying that adds up to a whole lot.
I mean, it certainly is significant dollars, but it is less than we've seen historically on, over a 20-year period or a 40-year period. It's less than our conventional, inflationary pressures on our conventional sources.
That's also assuming some other technology doesn't come in down the road, 10 years, 15 years down the road that blows the wheels off of something.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's,
Yeah. Can I speak to that real quick on that? So I wouldn't say a new technology has really come in that's blown the wheels off anything, but we've definitely seen increases in efficiency in solar from, say, like 10 years ago in the early power purchase agreements that were put in. And there's something that's called repowering arrays that we see happen right now. So what happens a lot of times in that circumstance is when there's still a tax credit available for new product, and there's a higher performing module that'll fit in the same space, you'll see developers circle back and discuss with the end user, like repowering the arrays, what it's kind of called in the industry. And what that is like, yeah, putting like a newer higher power density module on the existing racking that has like a remaining life on it. So I mean, those kind of things aren't off the table. If there's more efficient inverters, the inverters could be replaced with a more efficient inverter, things like that. Hopefully that was answering the question you asked.
Yeah, I just didn't like it.
What didn't you like about it? Just out of curiosity.
I understand what you're saying, but those are all dependent upon some other action happening or some other avenue being in place, and we can't count on those. The one thing we can count on is a 0.5% rate increase every year.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. I would say on the 0.5% rate increase, the reason that's in there is because there is still a small amount of degradation to the modules. And so as you get out into the later years of operation, that 0.5% escalator is really just covering that small degradation in the modules. You have an escalating rate on O&M. You have sort of a slight, very minimal, but still there, de-escalating rate on the power generation of the modules. And so that's why that escalator is really built in. One of the things that we ran two scenarios. We ran a 0% escalator and we ran a 0.5% escalator, and the levelized cost of energy was much lower. What we could offer was a much lower levelized cost of energy over the 25 years with a 0.5% escalator. And so that's why we chose that option.
If he put it in at 0, he would have had to start at a higher rate starting point.
Okay.
Correct. And from a time value of money standpoint, like even we used a 4% discount rate to do that analysis. And so the upfront cost you pay in the early years, it's hard to gain that back from a time value of money. So for example, the levelized cost of energy over a 25-year period with using a 4% discount rate, your levelized cost of energy is 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour. So much lower. If you present value the energy you're purchasing on this over the 25-year period, it's much lower than what you pay today. But that's using a 4% discount rate. So depending on the discount rate you use, right?
Okay, good discussion. I guess I would ask the board, are there other questions, other concerns that we have that we need to task Chris or Mike with researching?
I was gonna ask Rocky, if this is completed, will there be a dashboard that the public can see the output of this?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Would there be a dashboard that the public can see the output of this system if it's completed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. It'll be a cloud-based software. So you'll have 15-minute interval, readings of its production and historical. You'll be able to run reports, all that kind of stuff. And there's a what they call like a kiosk mode. So if you wanted to set up, say like at the entryway to IMU, you could set up like a kiosk that would kind of run through different slides of like how many trees it's, the equivalent of how many trees have been planted from the production, how many houses it would power. It kind of runs through some more like community oriented statistics like that, and then shows the real-time power production.
I assume that's something we could put on our website, on IMU's website.
Yeah, there will be an API key, yep, available to you to do that.
Good.
So back to your question, I don't have any more questions tonight, but as we go through some of the contract language, that may prompt some.
So you think that's the primary next step, is just getting the contract and going through it?
Well, that and also numbers to see what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and what's the most effective. But some of that may be driven by the contract.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
The requirements.
yeah, the
Yeah,
requirements are the.
You kind of verbally walked us through the numbers, but I think it'd be helpful for us to see something down on paper too. And
Okay.
Just kind of lay it out in a pro forma type of
Just
analysis.
comparing this to our current conventionals and,
Yeah.
you know, certainly there's a lot of variables in there. I don't know how many of those you want me to account for, a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and just we're proceeding with a most likely, you know, scenario on the crossover.
Yeah, I would say start with what you think is the most likely, but then help us understand what those other variables are that might impact it.
Yeah, I mean, and because it is a comparative power, those variables are, you know, the rest of it's, you know, political variables.
The types of things that Mike was talking about.
Yeah,
Still
so,
would be good just to call them out, even though you may not be able to put a number to them.
yeah, no, and I think those variables, you know, I guess just to be clear, those variables tend to, you know, just given the political environment and some of the pressures on natural gas, those political variables, the more volatile or more change you think there is, the better that a fixed price solar with a 0.5% escalator looks. And so the more more concerned you are about conventional methods and you know, coal and everything else, the better that the solar does look.
Okay. Yeah, Leslie, do you have anything else to add? Any other questions?
I think
You're breaking up really bad on us, Leslie. I think she said no, but
I think you're on mute, Leslie.
I don't have any more questions for Rocky.
you have more questions for Chris or the rest of the board or Mike?
Well, I would like to see some numbers of costs. I would like to see some discussion with Waverly. If they're going through the same thing we can, instead of reinventing the wheel, it would be nice to have some candid discussions with some of these other communities.
Yep, and I will see the Waverly General Manager at the meeting on Tuesday, and we plan to have this discussion, or at least I asked for a little bit of his time to, since they're a few weeks ahead of us, just kind of get an expectation what the future holds.
Yeah, and Leslie, we just talked about having Chris put together some numbers, which he's going to do.
It's sometimes hard for me to hear what you're saying at the front of the table.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll move on in our agenda. Mike, do you have any other more general information items to add?
Real quick.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Rocky, for joining us.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
So last week was our last week for doing underground finally. Maybe the longest we've ever gone into the season this year, but yeah, Tuesday was our last day. Wednesday come to abrupt stop. Turbinate bypass valve. We've got an issue on that where it's been sticking. The WD-40 trick is still not kind of
It's not going to be long term.
So anyway, we've been working with a valve repair company out of Texas. What we've come to the realization, we're gonna have to get it out of there, pull it out, ship it down there. They're gonna have to go through it, and then ultimately make the repair and then get it back.
So does that take Terminate down for that?
Terminate will be down. So what we did, that was supposed to run in March for our we got that moved up to run that tomorrow. So that buys us a little bit more time to get that repair done and get it back. And we're gonna try and do that in-house with some of our own staff to take that valve out.
Are we gonna exercise all of them at that time or just that one?
No, they're scheduled out, just the one. The other one I think is next month in February. Yeah, they schedule all of our runs out a year in advance, so we know well in advance when we're exercising. But we did have an outage on Scott Felton where underground primary cable went bad. We'll have another one temporary this week to get that repaired. Meeting tomorrow to discuss the alley work on the streetscape as far as phasing when that's going to happen and timing. That'll happen tomorrow with everybody.
Do you have a general idea of what to expect on that
Not,
conversation?
I don't have a total idea where we're going. My gut tells me I think the alley work is going to end up waiting until a year from now, or at least the winter from now, with concentration trying to get all the frontage stuff done this coming year. To get all the front stuff done.
Mike, did you get the design issues behind the building that mishmash is in? Did you get that figured out?
It's on hold, especially with we're kind of in the waiting game right now. There's a possibility that the property could possibly be up for sale or whatever type of thing. So, yep. And then the highway lighting on North Jefferson, the decorative black lights. Some of those newer poles, newer than the ones that further south have been up, they are failing at the base. We lost 2 in the windstorm. So
They just snapped?
yeah, they're just like pretty much paper thin. Just went.
They corroded out.
They corroded out. Mainly, we think a lot of it's come from the salt brine. It's really
Those aren't aluminum.
Not that those are steel.
Okay.
And we've had better luck with the older ones. They're not a different grade of metal, or if we got if it's a poorer quality of metal when these were built, or whatever. But so we've got a map now showing where all these poles are located, how many of them are down, how many more we think potentially could fail, and then I'll be talking with Charlie and then about how we want to move forward and what we want to do. Ultimately, my suggestion is going to be do away with the high dollar decorative pole that's there now, since we don't have the teardrops anymore, and just go with the standard hot dip galvanized pole that's painted black. I think for the most part, most people as they drive down the road, they're going to see a black pole there, and down the road they're just going to keep, yeah, and have light. And just I think it's important that we have a good product.
So how many of those do we have, Mike?
I think total there's 40 some of those poles all together, but that's not all. We don't have that many in this of these, just of the highway. I got to get the count. Okay. The guys literally went out today and got the count.
That meant of the bad.
Right. Yeah.
And then in the interim, what do we do? How do we check the other ones to make sure something doesn't fall over?
So they're looking at the bases of them. Just there's the decorative skirt that goes around them. They can kind of pull those up and try to visually see if they see like pitting or anything like that.
And Mike, remind us what the financial arrangement is between IMU and the city on those.
Yeah, the city owns the lights and when we maintain them.
So if there's a need to replace the poles, the city covers that cost.
Yeah, that's the way I understand that should go on this. You know, when we go into a new development, we charge the developer for those lights, and then they just rent. So we're not, you know, running it through the city to get that down. That's one of the processes we do, just try to make it streamed a little bit easier. Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Move on to water utility information items.
Yeah, we're starting in on our winter maintenance inside on the facility, and we'll continue that till the weather breaks. We got a lot of different things that we hold off till we get into this winter months, and then we'll go back to outside maintenance.
And what I would call the first phase of the streetscape, that's all complete from your standpoint?
Yes, the first block, and we got 9 blocks left. So, you know, it was 117,000 for that first block. And then some of these other blocks we've got more taps, obviously, and more of a tighter, especially in the alleyways. So those invoices we get from those will be higher. But like I say, Mike had mentioned it, we'll find out more. I already asked about the west side behind the brick house there on that, and they have told me no for this winter on that. They got the streets opened up and they're 5 weeks behind or whatnot because of different things that happened. So the frontage roads are open. And they're gonna, as soon as the weather breaks, go after. We don't know what phase, we'll find out tomorrow, whether it'll be the on Salem between First and Howard to Ashland, or on Ashland Street, those 3 blocks on Ashland, you know, from First to B Street. We don't know which, and then after that, they get those 2 done, then they'll go to the alleys. So that's at this point in time where we're at with the streetscape, you know.
So just to kind of, I mean, from that, you know, we're talking a little bit, we are expecting to get through these conversations today and tomorrow, get a little more information about city input on things, on all of our projects, but specifically on the water streetscape project. You know, what you guys will expect to hear. We don't know what the exact phases will happen, so we won't have any specific, you know, phase 1 and attached dollars to it, and phase 2. But so currently this year we have 117,000 that we've already, you know, paid for, and that's for that first phase. And we're not going to specifically, you know, in those capital projects specifically identify the phases because they can vary, but we will just have a dollar amount allocated. And so right now, capitals and all of our expectations are not 100% done, but I think what you can expect to see is 600,000 budgeted for those next year, and then 300,000 budgeted for the other ones. And that those of course could get updated a little bit as we get more information, but our expectation is you know, 6 more of those blocks will happen over the next budget fiscal year, and then the remaining 300 plus will follow.
This year's phases started in the middle of June. And so they had a late start. Now they're planning on, as soon as the weather breaks, whether that's the 1st of March or middle of March or whatnot, they're going after it.
So there will be more than the 117,000.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll have, you know, those extra summer, you know, that March, April, May, June months.
Remind me how much we had in the capital budget for that project for this year?
This year, well, we put, with not knowing, we put like 250,000 in there because we had the A Street project we were paying on, we paid off that 171,000, and then we figured the other for the streetscape, and we're underneath our budget line item.
So that seems reasonable that you've got, if I do my math, 128,000 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. So we might go, if they get things done quicker in March and April, we might go a little bit over on that, and then we'll gain it back then starting in July for the you know, in between the 2
It sure makes capital planning by year very difficult.
Very difficult, yes, and it's just one of those things. We've got it. You know,
Almost like when you take advantage of the weather, you don't really have this fiscal year.
absolutely, Lord. I think you're right, and that's what they said. You know, if weather breaks, they're going to go after it with maybe even more than one crew.
For construction purposes, a June 30 year end is not ideal.
Yeah, I agree. So that's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Okay, communication utility action items. We have one item, resolution approving the communications utility service policy. Chris or Kurt, you want to kind of?
Yep, I can take that. Yeah, basically, we just want to tighten up some language on section 5.6.
What was that, Kurt?
Section 5.6. Yep. We've had a couple people come in that had both internet and TV service, wanted to pay up their past due on their internet, get rehooked up with that without paying off their TV balance. The way we had it worded before, it was kind of ambiguous about exactly what we're trying to do. So we just cleaned that language up a little bit to require all communication charges be paid back up before we'll reinstate any service to you. So, and then this last time we looked at this document was back in 2018. So there were some addresses and website stuff that needed to be cleaned up too. I went ahead and did that. But
so this is one of the questions that I kind of emailed back and forth with Chris on. So this is a policy that's in place now, but you said 2018 was when we adopted it initially. And it's, other than a little bit of the cleanup things that you mentioned, the only real substantive change is in
5.6.
5.6.
Yep, otherwise it's just addresses and email addresses. So, okay. So, yep.
All right.
That was the question.
Can you hand me your telephone plan?
Yeah, and that's a good.
Any other questions for Kurt? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve policy.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Is this a roll call?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Board Member Forbush,
I'm still having trouble finding what we're talking about. Are we talking about the communication system extension policy?
We're talking about the service policy.
It
And then
says,
Section
I'm
5.
not sure I have seen that. What I'm looking at is, it says, 21.2 communication system extension policy.
Leslie, if it helps, it's page 20 or 27 of the packet.
I'm sorry, guys. It's on page what?
Page 27 of the packet is where the resolution starts, and the policies on the page behind it.
Yeah, oh, here we go. So there really was nothing to look at.
We changed some of the wording on section 5.6 of that service use policy, Leslie. So under the payment for services in section 5, the 5.6 paragraph changed a little bit to have, if someone was disconnected for non-payment, we're now going to require them to pay all their past due communication fees before we'll reconnect.
Okay.
So,
Sorry about that. I guess I didn't get that area copied, but no, I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
So is that a yes for roll call?
That's a yes.
okay. Board Member Hoyts,
Yes.
Rosca,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Okay, that is approved. Then other communications utility information items. Kurt.
yeah, I think you're all aware, I think Chris had sent out an email that we were awarded some potential grant money from the state for 4 different census blocks, 1 to the north and 3 to the south that we talked about here in the last few meetings. Still waiting to get contract and terms from the state. They said they would have those out in the next 7 to 10 days. I think we were just notified late Tuesday evening. So I expect that sometime this week we'll see what that is. So it is a fairly fast turnaround as well. They're requesting that stuff gets signed by the end of the month. So once we see those terms and everything, the contracts, we'll start putting together some budget numbers to kind of project how we might be able to get these projects done and let you take a look at it and see if it's something we want to go forward with. So, and
at least in high level, without saying numbers, can you talk through what the financial terms are for those?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's $600,000 of state funds to be utilized, and at least on preliminary engineering estimates, we're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $300,000 out of pocket for all 4 areas out of for us. So
that would be end up being IMUs.
IMUs, yep.
You said all 4 areas.
4 areas, 3 census blocks to the south. And 1 to the north. So about 100 potential customers within those census blocks themselves that we would have to provide service to. Then there's obviously some other areas. Basically, the census blocks are on one side of the road, so there'd be customers on the other side of the road that we could also go tackle. That would be at all of our own expense, but the main line would be run. So, so 100 potential customers. I would expect that to be more as we take a look at things. So,
and then there's, Chris and I were talking earlier, there's a portion of those costs for the north track that would be helped supported by the city.
Correct.
Because of the water reclamation.
Yep, that's coming up next. I got the bid packet. We're going to get ready to send that out. Yeah, we're already going to run that main line in that area where that census block to the north is. So we're already sort of committed to going up that direction anyway to hook up the water recovery.
Can you
plan.
send out to us when you get an opportunity, maybe just a little map that highlights those areas?
I can. Yep.
I'm curious to
Yep.
see what those are.
Yep. I've got them, but
I
I
kind of know the general.
Yep. The one to the north is a very, very small. It's a big census block, but there's only 15 houses within the inside of it. On the outside, there's much, much more potential. So we certainly pick up some additional customers there, I think. So
Can you describe what a census block is?
a census block, and I don't know how they determine this, but this is actually something the Census Bureau does. But if you actually go out on the Census Bureau site, you can click on a census block that will tell you the number of businesses, homes, things like that in these.
So it's the territory.
Territory, yeah. And I think as you get more people into a territory, the blocks get smaller. But obviously, when you get in the rural areas, some of these things are big. So
that's, excuse me, the next question I had was, we had some strategy conversation about what we were trying to do. And all of this grant funding really aligns with the strategy work that you had laid out.
Yeah, I think it does. So I mean, we're very fortunate. This, like I said before, we've talked about this before, where we are so close to Des Moines that normally when the broadband maps come out and the service areas or the census blocks that are available, anything around the Des Moines area has already been sucked up by the CenturyLinks and MediaComs of the world. And then they're also doing the fixed wireless. They backed the wireless out on this latest round, which opened up a few of these census blocks that were within our GPON footprint, which is also the nice thing too. We don't at this point, I don't anticipate having to have cabinets out in the field where we're going to power and maintain stuff like that too. They should all be within our system footprint that we can shoot light to at the present time. So gigabit passive optical network. So, but we use optics to provide that service. So those optics will only shoot so far. I mean, eventually, once you get far enough, you lose light and you can't provide service. But there's fancy math that you can do and everything else to kind of determine power levels. And I believe everything here will fit within inside that. So shouldn't be any additional cabinets or equipment out in the field that we're going to touch either. So
fancy math, is that a technical term?
It is. So yeah,
So really what it does is it enables us to bring the service there. We still have to decide, or the customers still need to decide if they want to choose that.
Correct. Yep. So, but we did do a survey up to the folks to the north. Like I said, we knew we were headed that way with the new plan up there. We got very favorable responses from everybody up there that they were definitely interested.
They probably don't have a lot of options.
Yeah, they don't.
Do you have a sense for how many surveys we heard back from?
I'd have to go back and look again. The one up north, probably we sent that out to probably 35, 40. I would guess we probably got close to half of those back, which from just a mailed survey is pretty good. So,
I think that was half.
Yeah. So.
And then on the south census tract, there's a kind of a partnership with the county too.
Yeah, the county is wanting to go ahead and expand out to their new road facility out there out by Quabi, and then on down to the conservation buildings as well. So they have set aside some money there to also help getting that main line down to those facilities so they can have dark fiber and be connected to their network. So that
would go. That's even further south than the census.
It is, right? Yeah. The census blocks we're looking at would stop in Nevada Street.
So would those be 22 initiatives or?
Yeah, the nice part about this is obviously we're going to do the sewer plant this year. Rick's going to fire that thing up in May, so he wants to have connectivity by then. The rest of the projects, right now, the contract with the state says they have to be completed by September of 2026. So we've got 4.5 years to actually perform all this work too. So it seems like a big number. It can really be spread out over multiple fiscal years, which will help if we need to. So.
But it's nice also having some partners that are also going to share some costs on
that
as well.
Exactly.
So.
Yep, it worked out real nice with the county going there. One of the big costs is going to be getting under South River, so that it'll be nice to have some help there. So,
yeah, and all in all, we don't have everything hammered out the agreement, but the initial concepts. I mean, this will be a great financially efficient, not super high impact financially. This is all something we can do with anticipated reserves, in the current year and 4 years for the larger project, including county. So, with that grant funding, I think that grant funding is what puts us into a place where this absent that grant funding, this definitely would not be happening here because the math doesn't necessarily pencil out as favorably. But when this grant funding came in, I think for the utility, this gets us some expanded territory and some options to provide service to 100 extra customers at a cost that we certainly couldn't do, but without working with people.
So similar to the solar, could we see some of those numbers penciled out, some of those scenarios, since if they need to get the terms and information back?
Sure. Yep. You bet. So yeah, I've got some started already. So we'll have all that for you next meeting. So.
And you said we were able to do that with reserves. We're not to borrow any to do these.
Yeah, with particularly with the larger, more expensive one to the south, like we have a way to make we were anticipating getting this path out to the sewer plant all along to just because the city needed this connectivity and we were going to there and make this work one way or another. Adding the grant and the city funding, we can make this work. We just don't have the specific numbers yet. It's just generally favorable.
And we're really just starting to generate reserves in Kirk's utility at this point. So we just got to keep that in mind.
Well, and yeah, technically we are still in a negative equity position. We will be for the foreseeable future. So when I say reserves, maybe just to clarify, these are cash reserves where we wouldn't, we'd be spending cash, but we're still a ways away from having positive fund balance that we consider reserves. So maybe I'll amend my last statement to say we'll have cash on hand to use and not necessarily reserves.
Yeah, good clarification. Okay,
Cool.
Kirk, anything else?
Speaking of it's not the sewer plant anymore. I've been told it's now the water resource recovery facility. So we have right there you go. So, but we do have the bid packet ready to go out for that. So next meeting I'll bring forward on the 24th. We'll set a public hearing for the 14th. This packet will go out tomorrow. I've requested bids be due back on the 7th of February at 1. We'll open bids at 3 o'clock that day. And then on the 14th, we'll plan on having the public hearing and approval of plan and specs and award the contract. So I've got a couple of different contractors that are very, very interested in it. So I'm hoping we'll get at least a couple of good bids on it. So
and so none of that needs to flow through us for approval.
No, we can put the bid out, just to put the bid out. The rest of this, obviously, we'll have to go through all of you to take care of all of that. So,
yeah, we can do the adopting the plan specs.
What's the bid for?
it will be for the main line fiber that will run out to the new sewer plant north of town. Then other than that, we're just working on some routine maintenance that we do this time of year. So over the next 8 weeks, we'll be doing OLT and router updates. And it got cold on us too, but we're still trying to get installs done. So we're putting temps on the ground right now. And as long as we can continue to get on our sidewalks, we'll continue to do that. So fingers crossed, it's supposed to be back up to 40s this week. So that'll help us out. And we'll see where we go the next couple of weeks.
So do you have about the same number in queue as you've had?
Yeah, we're still doing okay. I haven't looked real close at the schedule today. I was a little busy, but last week I was looking, we were still like 2.5 weeks out. So yeah, we are having to slow down a little bit now with putting temps on the ground. It takes 2 guys to do that instead of 1. But we still seem to be up. So yeah.
Good. Thanks, Kurt.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're on to combined electric, water, and communication action items, with the first one being a resolution approving a waiver related to hiring Allers and Cooney jointly with the city of Pella related to the 2080 agreement. So Chris, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so we're in the process of looking at the potential for a joint transfer line that would be owned with IMU and Pella. To do that, we're going to need to incur or to get a good sense of the cost and path and the finances. We're going to need to get some engineering done and share some costs that we both we're going to split 50-50 as the ownership of the project. That 20E agreement needs to, that's kind of the formal sharing or setting out some of the terms. Pella works with Allers and Cooney. They were going to be lead on a lot of the hiring of the engineer. So Allers has prepared a 2080 agreement or will prepare a 2080 agreement. A draft is in your packet on B. We won't have any action on that tonight because Pella wasn't ready with that. But Allers and Cooney will be the attorneys. We've worked with them. They're the attorneys, the primary attorneys for Pella. I think because of the shared agreement, we're not committing to any of the finances now, but we're setting out those terms and sharing them 50-50 and sharing some of the engineering costs. I do think at this point it's appropriate and probably even wise to have Allers and Cooney representing both sides in this initial stages of the 2080 agreement. This may be something that down the line we want to change, but for now, because it is a limited term and limited impact agreement that we will expand on in the future, there's probably no point in reinventing the legal wheel, so to speak.
And our interests with Pella are really aligned in this. I mean, we want the same things.
Yeah, exactly. So Pella has a link to Cedar Falls right now through Grinnell. We obviously connect up through Walnut and Des Moines. And then we both have redundant routes going with other providers. Those tend to get very, very expensive as our transport levels increase. So we would like to get some of that capability or capacity in-house where we could expand at our own rate. So this would connect Indianola and Pella together. So then we would have a route going up through Grinnell to CFU, and Pella would have a route come up through Walnut to CFU.
So is it simply to say we want to do the due diligence, and this is really bringing the legal counsel that Pella is using, is we want to join in on that? That's a simple way of just saying what we're trying to approve right now.
Right, exactly.
Lori, I couldn't hear what you said.
I'm sorry, I'll use my big girl voice. I just,
sorry.
In simple terms, really what we're approving is the combining of legal counsel to pursue due diligence. So we have a better understanding of what this will look like and what it will cost. We're not really approving anything beyond that tonight by saying that we want to approve this resolution.
Yeah, correct.
Is there any reason why we would not take whatever Allers and Cooney write and at least have an attorney look at it? I just really, this just goes beyond, this goes against my grain.
Yeah, and I understand, the potential for, sharing of or where you might run into issues having the same legal counsel. Given where we're at with this, and we're not, this isn't a full-fledged project yet. It's probably not dollar value wise. I mean, right now we're looking at spending and sharing, maybe $20,000 worth of engineering services to get the service. I think with that level of risk, we certainly could send it to another attorney, but Allers has represented us well in the past, and I think as you see this agreement, some of the advantages of using Allers is that they've made it clear that they won't hold any secrets from one side or the other. So if Pella is telling them, or they're aware that Pella has particular intents or issues or problems, they're going to disclose those with us, just so we have more knowledge, and both sides are going into this with there's no secrets, we're sharing this equally, and I think having those lawyers in there that are going to be required to disclose any of those things is an advantage.
I totally disagree. I just really think that, even $20,000, I think it's irresponsible not to have at least our legal counsel check. It can't cost that much.
But our interest would be aligned in this case with Pella. So the attorney is going to be looking out for both Pella and our interest equally. I assume, Chris, if we saw something going awry, we could very quickly back out of this and pursue our own legal counsel if we wanted to. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess I'm feeling like until we see something like that happening, I'm for this, what I would consider a relatively minor issue, I'm comfortable with Allers doing this with both us and Pella.
Leslie, I happen to agree with that after hearing this tonight, that it's just really about this due diligence work. I agree with you. When we go to that next step, we probably need to have somebody watching for our interest as well. But I agree with Adam. I'm comfortable with it at this point.
Chris or Kurt, remind us and go through some of the reasoning as to why we're looking to do this.
Yeah, basically it's capacity. We've grown very, very quickly. You know, obviously we're a couple of years ahead of what our business plan was. Our transport capacity right now to CFU is capped at 20 gig. We need more capacity going forward. So this new system then would allow us to add multiple waves to our transport capacity, basically unlimited at that point. I mean, larger than we would probably ever get. We could add that in 10 gig increments to whatever we needed. So,
and from a cost basis standpoint, my recollection is in not very long, this was going to be a positive.
Yeah. We've priced out what it would take to, and one of the things is when you work with other providers to get those transport routes in place, they obviously, when they build them, they want to build them big. So for one of our redundant route, they wanted to build that to 100 gig capacity. So they wanted that 100 gig right from the get-go. So we would be committed to that 100 gig level to start out with. That gets very, very expensive on a monthly basis. So when we start putting, numbers down on paper and take a look at that, it actually tends to make a little more sense to actually go out and possibly do a build. It actually lowers your monthly payment. You're still paying the money, but on a finance term, but it's actually less than you pay another company. And then again, too, you have more control over the actual capacity. So if we don't need 100 gig right now, if we just need 30 gig, we could do that. So I don't know if that explained it or not.
Yeah, no, I just wanted.
So
Laura and I were talking earlier. We were having some conversation about that, and I tried to explain some things, but sometimes my brain isn't so good, and I don't always remember things.
Yeah, this gives us full control and full capacity. And we'll certainly overbuild this and entertain any business opportunities. But for roughly the current cost of maybe I won't quote the exact number, the capacity that we need, for a few years into the future at least, we can lock that future in and not have to deal with any. We'll have the bond payment fixed. And we'll not have to worry about, like with another provider, getting any of the
No escalators.
No escalators. Also, no. So we're, it ends up being relatively financially a benefit nearly immediately, but certainly by the time you add a couple of years, about cost of living, or usually 3% or CPI index. So it'll vary a little bit to pick your favorite out, a couple of years of 4%,
and again, the money quickly. We would consider those additional opportunities. We've had those conversations here again. We've not really had what those full opportunities look like or what they would benefit.
Opportunities.
What Chris just mentioned, there'd be future business opportunities.
Sure. Yep. We can talk about those.
That's not given with what we're doing today. It's really giving us the opportunity to expand and for us to have further conversation about what aligns with what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there other questions or comments on this topic? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Is this roll call also, Chris?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Board Member Forbush,
No.
Voights,
Yes.
Rosca,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
A resolution is approved. And then Chris mentioned this, but the next item related to the 2080 agreement with Pella, we are going to table at this time.
Let's just pull it.
Just pull it from the agenda.
Pull it from the agenda. We'll add it to a future agenda when it's ready.
Yep, sounds good. So we'll move on to 9C, which is a resolution approving the administrative services agreement with Mission Square Retirement. Chris, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. So it kind of goes to we're now doing payroll ourselves and have our own EIN numbers to do so. One of our vendors is, or a vendor with the city is Mission Square Retirement. They provide the 457 plan administration. now that we're our own entity, we need our own agreement. And so this, before is a consideration of, it's an agreement between IMU and Mission Square. It mirrors the city's current agreement. They are the city's current vendor and have been for 20 years.
At the same rate.
Yeah, at the same rate. And ultimately, it's required. This will require to continue to make those 457 contributions on the employee's behalf.
So with this, as we stand on our own, the data becomes ours. I mean, I'm sure that was probably as part of the conversion from the city. We have the data and they're managing it separately from the city. We're not in Mission, whatever their name is, Mission Square's eyes. We're not continuing to be one entity. They've separated us out from our reporting.
Correct. Yeah.
Chris, is this agreement the same that we've had previously?
Yeah, it'd be the agreement and the terms that we've operated on for, I guess I don't know how long the exact terms have been, but it's the same vendor for, 15, 20 years.
So no changes?
Yeah. And so this has been our
It's really just slicing it off for us to be our own independent.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the only reason I'm asking is, once again, I think unless this is exactly, what we've been operating, we would normally have an attorney at least read it for us.
Yeah, this is the same agreement we're operating under.
And
okay, good.
I asked this question too. I mean, the city would have had attorney review at the time they agreed to this, right?
Correct.
So it's not IMU that paid for the services, Leslie, but it has been reviewed.
But it has been, okay.
How often will we have to renew this agreement? Or is it a perpetual kind of thing?
It is a perpetual until we change or.
And Chris and I had a conversation too. The rate that they're charging seems really high to me, 55 basis points. And so for now, we need to, just so our employees are taken care of, we need to go this direction. But Chris and I talked about that. We have an opportunity in the future to bid it out to see if we can get a lower price.
And I think for timeliness, this certainly will is required right now, but an RFP for the future, just to ensure we're getting the best value for ourselves and our employees, is a wise choice.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on that?
Nope.
I would entertain a motion then.
So moved.
I'll second. I have a motion and a second. Are we doing roll call again? We got a lot of these tonight.
Yes.
ahead.
Board member Voights,
Yes.
Rosga,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
and Forbush.
Yes.
Okay, that resolution is approved. The next one is a resolution approving salaries. We hired a network support specialist, and his information was included in your packet. Anything you want to add to that?
Nope, we're glad to have Doug. And I think he'll make a great fit to the team and certainly be a good resources for us to rely upon.
And Doug is reporting to Kurt, right?
Correct. And I'm very happy because there's now 3 less things on my to-do list.
So now you have time to go expand the.
Right, exactly.
But the other thing I understand is also Doug brings with him some pretty good experience in some areas that.
He does, yeah. Yep, he's worked up at Des Moines for a optical firm up there that had multiple locations for many, many years, and was doing that. He was doing a lot of the IT. He was doing the IT stuff along with some of the managerial stuff there too. We just wanted to get into the IT, so he's very eager to get in and do it. And yeah, we hit him with a lot of stuff today, and he did a very nice job of absorbing it all. So
I was a little surprised with the salary. With that experience, if we come into that salary.
yep. So yeah, it was comparable to
Okay, unless there's other questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion to approve that salary.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is this roll call also?
Yes.
I try to
I
mix
need you
it
to
up. I'll
stop
start with
asking.
Board Member Smith this time.
Yes.
Forbush,
Yes.
Whites,
Yes.
and Rosga.
Yes.
Okay, then this next one is selection of the 2022 officers. I've had conversations individually with, I think everyone on the board about this topic. This is not a new thing for the board, but just to kind of share publicly. I was chair for a couple of years. Mike became chair for a couple of years. Last year with two relatively new board members on. That would have been unfair to put them in the position of the leadership position when they started. I agreed to take on the chair duties for a year. At that time, we put Deb Richardson, or she was voted into the vice chair role. I think under the expectation or assumption that she would roll into the chair after this year. Obviously, with her resignation from the board, that threw a wrench into that. So. I'm happy to have discussion about this if there's any comments that anybody wants to make, but the conversations I've had is that we might consider tabling this for until either the next meeting, our second meeting in January, or the first meeting in February. I think there's the potential for a nomination to replace Deb on the board, and I think there's some desire from the board members to let that process play out a little bit. Anything, you're shaking your head, Lori, anything else you want to add to that?
I just think with Deb's news, 30 days wouldn't be a bad thing, just to take a step back and really understand the landscape before we make a move. But I do thank you for your time in the chair role multiple times.
And thank you. And it's obviously been a challenging year this year. And I do not have an intent to stay in the role. I want to play my part and do what's needed, but I am perfectly happy handing over the chair and the vice chair roles to others on the board. So I just want to make that clear to everybody.
So do we need any kind of a vote or resolution to set this aside for 30
Chris,
days?
what do you think? Do we need to-
If you table that, we'll table it to a certain date. So you'll pick and table it to the second meeting in February or some version thereof. And I think that'll just be not a roll call.
Do we want to table it to the second meeting in January or wait till the first meeting in February?
Are we having a second meeting in January?
I'm saying that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that, but we have a lot of things. Chris is going to go through a few things here in a second. So we've got a lot of things that are coming up.
Mostly, I don't know if you just heard Mike just suggested waiting until the first meeting in February. I would support that too for this conversation.
You two want to make that motion?
I'll make a motion we table till the first meeting in February.
A second.
Okay, but this isn't roll call, is it?
No,
Yeah.
but just for everybody's information, that'd be the 14th, February 14th,
Valentine's Day.
second Monday in February.
A big romantic evening. Come on,
On a
Lori.
Monday night. And I don't see my husband usually until 7:30.
Okay, so I think we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? Okay, we have that too. Okay, we are on to other combined utility information. Chris.
All right, next week, I'll be at a meeting. I'll get a lot out of that. We'll be setting rates for the next year, so I'll have some important budget-related considerations coming out of that meeting.
Do you generally have an agenda out of those meetings that you could share with us? Just to get a sense for the kinds of things talked about there.
Yeah, they have those posted. I can just share the link for all the meeting materials.
Tom used to share the whole packet, which I didn't always
I
find
don't
useful,
necessarily
but-
need the whole packet, but
Yeah.
just so you can get a sense for what kind of conversations occur.
Yeah, I'll forward on some informational link.
Thank you.
So that comes up to, so certainly out of that, we're getting some important budget related information at our next meeting. And that I would hope we would be able to meet in January again. We do have a number of things that need to be accomplished. This next meeting we'll have quite a bit of tasks, so I expect it to be a long one as well. We'll go through some of those that are 5-year capital plans.
And are those part, so I personally don't feel like we've wrapped up the strategy plan and the action items out of that. Will we see that as part of the budgeting process, or how will we do that?
There's certainly that strategy plays a big role in that, and that was one of the other items that I'll bring up. I think it's probably appropriate that given that strategy meeting is a long conversation probably by itself and certainly has budget implications. If you guys would entertain having a special meeting to review that, I think before the second.
Personally,
meeting.
I would appreciate that. I don't know where everybody else stands on that.
Chris and I talked about that today, and I thought that might be a good idea too, because partly to answer your question, Lori, we have kind of competing interest here. We kind of have a budget timeline that in February we have to have a completed budget. So Chris is starting that process. We typically review the capital projects first and then roll into the operating budget and have that approved then by the due date. In the meantime, we also have this strategy discussion. So if it's okay with everybody, we kind of need to do kind of, yeah, well, at least for this year, we need to kind of do both at the same time, which isn't going to be extremely clean, but I guess I feel like the intent of the board and the intent of Chris and his leadership team are fairly well aligned. So I don't know that there's going to be.
So when do we propose doing this then?
The strategy session. I'm open for suggestions on that.
Yeah, I was going to send out after following this discussion. We'll kind of talk through some of the schedules with staff, and tomorrow morning we'll send out a couple of dates and see what works best. Really, it'll in all likelihood be next week. Not necessarily Monday, but we'll. If you've got some suggestions, feel free to send them to me, but I'll send out a list of dates that work the best for us, and probably be midweek, just guessing somewhere midweek next week that we
try to do it local, or we head to English so I can get lost again.
No, this won't be local.
So does next Wednesday, does that happen to work for everybody? Do we, just to help you out, Chris?
So it'll be the 19th. Wednesday the 19th.
That doesn't work for me. I'll be on a meeting.
Oh, you'll be at me. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So never mind. We'll let you send out the email tomorrow morning.
Yeah. So
suggest some dates.
Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday.
It's on Friday night, but yeah.
Yeah, I got it covered on Friday. Tuesday would work for me.
Tuesday the 18th.
Yeah.
Leslie, how does
Thursdays are Friday. Tuesdays or Thursdays are best for me.
Okay. Well, I'll send that out. So we'll run Tuesday up the ladder, but we'll try to make Tuesday work.
And so while we're on the strategic plan, you sent us a very early version from the consultant that we hired. I know you and your team were working to kind of refine that and maybe get a second better draft. Is that the intent, to have that second draft for us to review prior to this meeting, or how do you want to go about this?
I think out of this meeting will be the refinement. There's a couple of, I think, areas or timelines or priorities that we need to kind of gauge board opinions on. And I think that'll let us, one of the items that I think is in there is, that Adam commented on, I think is, correct. There's a lot of not concrete or defined dates in there. And that's somewhat purposeful because, a lot can change, or a lot needs to go into some of those decisions about when stuff can be accomplished. And those are really the items that I'm hoping to get out of the meeting is, some of those trustee opinions about what goes, those priorities and what it takes to get there. So, ultimately we'll have the current draft will be what we're working from, and out of that, I hope we'll get something a little more refined that we can put some dates and make a little more concrete.
So, and I'm fine with that, but to help speed along that discussion, I wonder if there's at least a starting point for suggestions on how to change the wording that can come from you or the leadership team, so that we're not just brainstorming as a big group. I think it'd be helpful to at least have a starting point, and we can say, yeah, that makes sense, we can move on to the next one, or we can say, no, what about this, this, and this, and so.
Yeah, I think those starting points, they exist in some form. We've discussed those and we kind of arrived at that. So we can put those down on paper and just, you know, as discussion starters, so to say.
Yep, exactly. Okay, Chris, good. What else you got? I think I interrupted you.
Our auditor has indicated that tomorrow afternoon or Wednesday morning, we should have a draft of our audit to review. And if that happens, we'll expect to see that presented at the next meeting. So we'll certainly, when we get that, we'll send that copy out of that draft for you know, all your review as well. But Chris and I will take that.
Just we kind of feels like we've been waiting a while for the year to wrap things up. Can we nudge him along by just telling him that we're planning on him coming, attending the next meeting, and schedule him and make sure he's going to show up then instead of leaving it up in the air?
Yep, we'll do that. Chris, you want to chat a little bit about payroll?
Sure. We had a successful payroll week last week.
People got paid.
Everybody got paid, yes. So just a little kind of recap. We got direction, I think it was in September maybe, from the board to officially take payroll into house. We did that. Karen Peters, we hired her as our AP/payroll clerk. So we started kind of setting some groundwork. It was kind of from the ground up. We didn't do any sort of conversion with payroll information from the city's system that they were using or are using. We did have some of it set up. We had to do some setup for inventory purposes, which employees have been using since we went through the conversion in May of 2020. So some of that was set up, but a lot of it had not been set up that was specific to payroll. So Karen and I worked on that, and Chris helped us with some of that setup as well. We met with employees individually. We did a lot of testing, payroll comparisons from the city system to the system we were setting up. Did several pay cycles that way. Just did a lot of testing and checking, and employees were great. We have an app that we use for time entry. Most employees, I think, have that on their phone. They can also have it on their desktops, but it's a separate app that we use for time entry. All of that had to be set up. Employees were extremely helpful, giving us feedback along the way. They were able kind of to see things as we were setting it up. So we're able to help us to catch a few things there. But overall, a lot of work, but I think it went well, and I have not gotten any negative feedback from any of the employees, so that's a good thing. But I feel like it was a success. So,
any surprises along the way?
No, not really any surprises, I don't think.
Yeah, I think Chris tested, retested, and tested it again just to be sure. So, you know, we had a pretty vetted process, and we, you know, between Chris and Karen, rechecked everything down to, you know, from the ground up. So we, you know.
So what dates do we run payroll?
So it's bi-weekly. Our first pay was last week, the 7th. So it's bi-weekly from there on. So, Innovative, our software company, they weren't on site, but they were very engaged and responsive and very helpful. So we had a good experience that way as well.
Yeah, got a lot of positive feedback on the app. I think you know, it you know, it's a little bit of a leap of faith, and some of those are saying it, you know, people will get this, as you know, trust us. We certainly tested as much as we could, and you know, our employees were able to help and pick it up, and so, you know, thanks to them for you know, contributing to the success of this. I think their engagement and a quick review, let us be able to test this. And then, like I said,
Anytime you can improve time entry, that's gotta make it. I forgot my phone number. Sure hope so.
yeah, absolutely. This is, it is an app that they use and are familiar with, and just adding another layer to it. They've been very complimentary of the features in comparison to, what we used previously. Is pretty user friendly, and there's a couple of beleaguering the point of all the couple of features that everyone really likes. It seems like an organized and thought out way to handle anything, and I think we're in a good place.
Good job.
Thanks, Chris. Good job. Tell Karen thanks from us too.
I will certainly do that.
Okay. Anything else on your list, Chris?
I think we covered everything in.
Perhaps finding a cooler
Um,
room.
Go ahead.
How are we going to, do we have, I think it was you, Adam, that said that we would have to go out for bids if we wanted to change attorneys?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, Leslie. Let's have that discussion. Chris and I did talk about this a little bit today. If really he needs direction from us as a board, if we want him to considering a different attorney relationship. And I know that's not new to any of us on the board. I think I've had conversations with each of you. But you're correct, Leslie. What I would suggest that we direct Chris to do is to put out a bid to multiple firms and then have a process to evaluate the bids as they come back, both based on rate and experience working with utilities, that sort of thing. And then after those results, based on a recommendation from Chris and his staff, we would then consider hiring a different firm if that's the route we want to take.
Do we need, or maybe Chris, you have this, do you have some list of qualities or competencies we're looking for? Are we using what we've had only we don't want to share? I mean, how would we start the bid?
Different from necessarily a bid where, we come with, here's $1 to provide, a service. I would recommend we do, an RFQ, and then we would ask for, send that out to several of the firms. I think we know public information on some of the attorneys that represent, like size or, potentially attorneys that could handle. Ask for those requests for qualifications. Have them, explain their core competencies. Let us know, why, a little bit of an interview process in that document. Why them versus one of their peers. And in that, of course, would include items like the hourly rates that we would consider. But ultimately, as this is a professional relationship, we're not necessarily looking for the low bidder in this process compared with a lot of those. But we really are looking for those qualifications.
So your RFQ will give us a pool, and then we'll be able to start to narrow down from that.
Right.
I don't know, we can take a vote on this. In fact, I don't think we can, but is there consensus in terms of agreement to give Chris that direction?
Leslie, what do you think?
I couldn't hear most of that.
Are you in favor of putting an RFQ out to have Chris start seeking potential attorney alternatives?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're all in agreement on that.
Yep.
All right, perfect.
You got your marching orders then.
All right, I will get that going.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Long meeting. Any other business that we need to consider that we haven't discussed already? We covered a lot tonight. Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 We are adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.